After reading all three articles, I chose to summarize the Grant Wiggins 7 Steps to Effective Feedback. I think that with my school overhauling their feedback system and teacher evaluation system through feedback, that this was the most applicable to what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis as an administrator at school. So I'm going to summarize and go through some of what Wiggins talked about in this article to develop a good system of feedback. First, Wiggins defines feedback as information about how we are doing in an effort to reach our goal. He spells out pretty clearly that there's a very big difference between feedback and guidance. And feedback is general observational information rather than guidance, which is telling someone what they could or should do. The 7 steps to feedback or effective feedback, according to Wiggins, is that feedback should be goal referenced. It should be tangible and transparent. It should be actionable, user-friendly, timely, ongoing, and consistent. And then Wiggins does a great job of going through each of these steps in detail and giving some examples of what effective feedback would look like and some examples of maybe ineffective feedback for each of these steps. So I'm going to go through some of those. The first one being goal referenced, and it's that effective feedback requires that a person has a goal, takes an action to achieve that goal, and then receives goal-related information about his or her actions. He uses the example that if you were to tell a joke, the goal would be to make people laugh. So you could have feedback based on giving that joke and either seeing or hearing people laugh or not laugh. And then, so that would be feedback that you would collect on your own. And then the other part of that is getting feedback from someone else. So he points out, if you had a task of making people laugh, after attempting your task, you could ask people how funny it is, or where might it be funnier, so you could get an outside perspective and use that as feedback towards becoming more funny or something of that nature. The next one is tangible and transparent. So good feedback systems have goals that are clear and tangible, results related to the goal, and that feedback should be so tangible, Wiggins says, that anyone with a goal can learn from it. And I thought he had a really good anecdote in this section about a student who, at the very end of the year, went to his teacher and said that she had been writing the same thing on his paper all year, and he still didn't know what it meant. And when the teacher asked the student what she had been writing, he said vagu, V-A-G-O-O. And it turned out that she had been writing that his writing was too vague. So that I thought that was interesting that he had been given the same feedback over and over and over. He obviously did nothing to change what he was doing because he didn't even know that the word vague was the word vague or what it meant. So I think that's where the tangible transparency comes in, where you need to make sure that they are actually able to learn from your feedback or use it in an effective manner. The next step is actionable. So effective feedback is concrete, specific, and useful. It should provide the person receiving feedback with some actionable information. So Wiggins here provides some details about what is not good feedback or effective feedback, and that is saying good job or writing B+ on a paper. And that rather than saying good job, you should tell them specifically what they did that made it a good job, so that they would actually have some information to work on. And also he provides an example of going into a classroom and seeing about half the class off track and actually giving that data to a teacher, for instance, saying 12 out of the 25 students today were not engaged in the lesson, and this is what I saw. Um, that's just an observation. It has no opinion behind it. It also has no judgment, which is important in the steps of feedback. The next step is for the feedback to be user-friendly. The feedback should be geared towards the level of the person you are giving feedback to. Um, Wiggins does a good job here of talking about describing a complex baseball swing using torque and physics as your means of explaining what's going wrong with a baseball swing to a 6-year-old who would obviously not understand most of the terminology being described. It's really important to take into account the person receiving feedback and making it, giving them feedback on their level. Wiggins also talks about keeping it to one or very few kind of important takeaways rather than throwing a ton of things at someone and hoping they just use one or two of them. So, um, one goal is usually a good outcome. Timely, I think this is a big one in education. This is one that I've focused on a lot at our school. We do weekly, um, at least once a week, we're in every teacher's class and we do a 15-minute observation, and then we give feedback immediately through a Google Doc, and we set up a time to meet either that day or the following day for a face-to-face debrief. So this talks about how feedback should be happening as quickly as possible, and how obviously the longer you wait, the less useful that feedback becomes. Feedback should also be ongoing. The more feedback someone gets, the more they can improve their performance in that task or towards that ultimate goal. So it should be thought of as a formative process with an ultimate goal being potentially a summative piece. Um, and then to stick with that, it should also be consistent. Everyone should be on the same page in terms of understanding how feedback is happening and what is expected. Wiggins talks about how students and teachers should all have an understanding of what mastery or proficient looks like and what exemplar work would be, um, and so that it can be judged equally across content areas or grade levels, or even when students are working together on feedback, that there would be some consistency amongst the students when giving feedback. And the last thing is, in the article, it talks about how all feedback should be geared towards a long-term goal. And this kind of is brought up in each piece of each step of his 7-step system. But it's important to know that there should be an ultimate outcome expected. There should be something that feedback is gearing towards. And this is talking about having a long-term goal. So overall, I thought it was a great article. I'm going to bring it back to my teachers and the leadership team and talk about how we can use that to better our practice.